Aloha and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I also want to thank Civil Beat for giving me the opportunity to kind of tell this story. As you've heard, I have been an oncologist for more years than I like to count, and I have learned a lot about death and dying in that time. But tonight's story is about how my perceptions and my values have changed over those 40 some odd years about this issue. You know, all physicians, all doctors during their training are taught to help as many people as we can, to keep people alive, and to comfort them. And this fit right in with my goals, my needs as a cancer specialist, as an oncologist. But several issues. As an oncologist, we are taught to never take away hope. We are taught to never stop offering one more treatment, no matter what the cost sometimes. But if you follow this dictum totally, then the patient's desires and wishes sometimes become secondary. So the one thing we are never taught about is we are never taught how to talk to your patient about dying. And I dare say today in medical schools, both here in the mainland, they're still not taught that message. So I will never forget a young Hodgkin's lymphoma patient that I had as a patient who had gone through every conceivable treatment that was available at that time. And she had progressed on all of them, regardless of everything that we did. And she ended up dying in the tripler ICU with tubes in every orifice and intubated and on a ventilator. And as I remember and recall at that time, my goal as her doctor and the goal of our entire treatment team was very simply to prolong her life as much as we could. But the problem was we never gave any significant thought to the quality of that life that we were prolonging. So time passed. And over the years, it became very clear to me that I was not always doing good for my patients. Rather, many times, the treatments that I offered did more harm than benefit. And as time passed with this career of taking care of cancer patients, what I found was that more and more and more of my patients were asking me for relief. They were asking for relief from terminal suffering, from the misery that every patient has when they are waiting to die. Now, terminal suffering can come in many different forms, and each patient suffers it in their own individual way. The suffering can be physical with unbearable pain, so bad that the only way to control that pain is to put the patient to sleep. Terminal suffering can be social, where the patient undergoes progressive withdrawal and isolation as they withdraw from their friends and their families and life itself. The suffering can be spiritual because they are looking at their loss of their being. And the other fear is not knowing what's coming, because nobody's ever come back, right? But after my experience in these 9 months taking care of patients who request medical aid and dying, it has been very clear to me that the most important terminal suffering that stimulates or makes a patient ask for aid in dying is the psychological. The anxiety that they experience, the loss of control, the loss of any pleasure. And what that drives is life has no meaning. This is what makes patients ask for aid in dying. Now, I have treated dying patients for over 40 years, and I've treated thousands of them. And I know one thing above all, death is not their enemy. The terminal suffering that every dying patient experiences, that is their enemy. That's the stuff, the feelings that they have just waiting to die. So over the last 10 years or so, I have become a very strong advocate for end-of-life choice. And I have done my very best. I've testified before the legislature. I've gotten radio and TV interviews, and I've written I don't know how many editorials. And I've met a lot of other people here in Hawaii who have the same dedication and feelings about this issue that I do. So I was actually quite happy when Kaiser asked me to come back in January and really become director of their medical aid and dying program. And in the past 9 months, I have to say that I have learned a lot. I've learned more than I ever dreamed of from the 30-plus patients that I have taken care of over this time period. I have learned that patients who ask for aid in dying, they're very special people, okay? Medical aid in dying is not for everyone, okay? No question. But the patients who request it, they're very special. They are very courageous. They're thoughtful. They're very insightful and intelligent. And they're very dedicated. These patients, they know they're going to die. And there's nothing they can do to stop it or control it. So what they ask to control is how, when, where, and with whom they will end their lives in a peaceful and quiet manner. Now, the other thing I've learned from these patients is they, deep within inside them, they are very clear why they are requesting this, why they are requesting aid in dying. And both the patients and their families, they know when it's time. They know when it's time to request it. And the other thing I've learned from this is that both the patients and their families are incredibly grateful that we have this law available to them in Hawaii, the Our Care, Our Choice Act, that allows them to end their lives the way they choose. So what about me in caring for aid in dying patients as a physician? It's been an enlightening experience, a learning experience, and a very moving experience. I make it a point to go see my patients to their home, and I can tell you that sitting by the bedside of a dying patient, sometimes holding their hand, but mainly listening to their story. Sometimes it's a story about their death, but more usually it's a story about how meaningful their life has been. And when you do that, you get a reflection of your own mortality in their faces. So, I feel I've grown greatly, both emotionally and mentally in the past 9 months. I believe I am a better physician now than before I started caring for 8 and dying patients. And I also believe that every physician, when we can no longer cure, we have a duty and an obligation to provide comfort for our patients by any means necessary and to respect their wishes, especially at the end of their lives. So I'm going to close this with a quote from Dr. Louis Pasteur, and believe it or not, he wrote this in 1886. So he said, "One does not ask of one who suffers, what is your country and what is your religion? One merely says, you suffer, and this is enough for me. You belong to me, and I shall help you." And personally, as a physician, I am very grateful that I am able to help these patients end their life by their choice. Mahalo.